Welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here. And after taking a break for a week, you know, you'd expect attendance to drop off. So I appreciate that you all kept it on your calendars and are here today. So we'll do 3 weeks looking at just different stories out of the book of Daniel. So we're not going through the whole book of Daniel, which would be actually kind of hard. That'd be a lot of work. But just a few stories. Now, when you think of the book of Daniel, there's probably a couple of stories that you remember from Sunday school that come right to your mind right away. So, okay, so what's one?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar turning into a cow. Yeah, that's a great story. What else? Yeah, Daniel and the lion's den. So that is actually one of the stories we will do. We'll do that on the 3rd week. Daniel and the lion's den. What other stories from Daniel do you remember?
Writing on the wall.
Yes, the writing on the wall, the hand that crawled in and wrote on the wall, which we're going to do that story next week.
The 3 guys thrown in the furnace.
And the 3 guys thrown in the furnace. Yeah, which is what we're going to do today. So, yeah. So you remember the stories and they come right back to you. But hopefully we'll be able to give it a little context and a little depth, more so than what you remember from Sunday school. That'd be my hope. So, Lord, we pray that you would bless our time together looking into this wonderful book and seeing how you preserved your people and watched over them even while they were in exile. Preserve and watch over us while we are in exile upon this earth, away from our heavenly home and waiting that day when we will come into the promised land. Amen. All right, let's just read the chapter together first, and then we'll go back and look at some things about it.
What chapter?
So, Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. All right. Follow along with me, would you? King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So that's a good story, isn't it? That's a great story. What I'd like to do is set the stage a little bit for what are they doing in Babylon in the first place? How did this happen? How did they get there? So would you turn, let's start with 2 Kings chapter 23. Turn to 2 Kings 23. And while you're doing that, you can see on this map here, I hope you can sort of orient yourself and see where you are. Here's the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Israel. So all the... Yeah, did I say 2 Kings 23? Yes. So all the area that is in blue and green, that was what was part of the Assyrian Empire. And you may recall it was the Assyrian Empire that swallowed up the northern kingdom of Israel. Israel, remember, the Jews split into the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. So the northern kingdom ended up getting defeated and destroyed completely by Assyria. But by about 609 BC, the Assyrian kingdom was weakening, and a new kingdom was emerging, and that was the kingdom of Babylon. So all the area that's in yellow and green is what, at the height of its power, was part of the Babylonian kingdom. So the capital of Assyria was up here. Babylon defeated them, and the Assyrians had to withdraw to the west, and Babylon just kept pushing right along there. And so if you look at 2 Kings 23, did I say 23?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to verse 28. And this is telling us about the death of King Josiah. And I hope you remember King Josiah. Josiah is a popular name now, by the way, for a Christian family. How many of you know a Christian family who named a kid Josiah? That's a very popular name. Partly because it's, Pastor who? Oh, that's right, that's right. Yeah, partly because Josiah is one of the really good guys in the Bible. How many of you know parents who named their kids Ahab? Nobody did that, right? Because he's one of the bad guys.
Yeah, he became king at 8 years old.
Yeah, he became king at 8 years old, and then when he grew up, they found the lost book of the law in the temple, which we think may have been the book of Deuteronomy, and they read it, and they were cut to the heart where we haven't been following God like we're supposed to, and he committed all these reforms. He got rid of the witches and the sorcerers, he got rid of the prostitutes, he got rid of the false idol temples, and all this stuff. Okay, now here in verse 28 of chapter 23, the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. King Josiah went to meet him, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo as soon as he saw him. So, Babylon is getting stronger, is pushing Assyria this way. So, the second and third largest empires then, the shrinking empire of Assyria and the empire of Egypt down here, are going to kind of join forces and see if they can stop the Babylonians. So this is, you can't understand the Bible if you don't understand all this geopolitical stuff that was going on. It's huge. It's a huge part of the context, and everything that's happening is happening according to God's plan. So Necho, the Pharaoh, is coming up here to meet what's left of the Assyrian Empire, and they're going to see if they can stop the Babylonians. But who's in between Egypt and Assyria? Little
Israel.
Judah, little Judah, right there. It's not even on the map. It's so tiny, little tiny country. And so Josiah tries to stop Necho, and Necho kills him. So look at verse 30. And his servants carried him dead in a chariot from Megiddo, and brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him, and made him king in his father's place. So Josiah gets killed, so the people take the prince, his son, and make him the king. Verse 31, Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. What happened? Go down to verse 33. And Pharaoh Necho put him in bonds at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and laid on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And he took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So they make the son of Josiah, Jehoahaz, king, but Pharaoh, the guy who killed Josiah, is saying, that's not the one I would have picked. He wants somebody that's going to be favorable to Pharaoh, to Egypt, right? So in just 3 months, he gets rid of the king, and he puts a different son of Josiah in charge. And this son is obviously one who's going to be more favorable toward Egypt. And then Egypt assesses them a huge amount of money. They have to come up with this huge money that they have to pay to Egypt. It's protection money, right? It's a racket. The big guys are picking on the little guys. That's how it works. So Jehoiakim becomes the king now, and we think that's probably about 609 BC. And then eventually, a few years later, is a great battle at a place called Carchemish. So it's way up here. And at Carchemish, the Egyptian army and the Assyrian army sided together and fought against the Babylonian army. And Babylon won. They beat them bad. So let's go to chapter 24. So 2 Kings 24. In his days, it's Jehoiakim's days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. So the guy that the Pharaoh put in charge of Judah, now that Pharaoh's been defeated, Nebuchadnezzar keeps right on marching and comes down there, and now Nebuchadnezzar kind of becomes the big daddy. Now instead of paying off Egypt, now they have to pay off Babylon. But remember, this King Jehoiakim, he was picked by the Egyptian guy. So he probably doesn't like the Babylonian guy that much. So what does he do? Chapter 24, verse 1, he's a servant for 3 years. So 3 years after Nebuchadnezzar kind of takes charge, he rebels against him. Verse 2, the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, those are the Babylonians, and bands of Syrians, and bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites, and sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord. Go down to verse 6. So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, it means he died, and Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his place. And the king of Egypt did not come again out of his land. So Egypt is now, they've been beaten so badly, they're kind of done, right? For the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. So Babylon now controls everything here, all this. And the king that's in Judah, he rebelled. And so that's in 605. And so when Nebuchadnezzar defeats now Jehoiakim for rebelling, what he does is he selects some people and takes them away to Babylon. And I've talked before about how that's how they used to do it, right? When you conquer a country, you don't just assign a police force and you have to stay there and watch it all the time. You pick the smartest people, and you pick the people who are the natural leaders, and you make them go to your country. And now there's nobody left to revolt and start to rebel, right? So it was at that time, we think about 605 then, that's when Daniel and his 3 friends are taken away into captivity all the way here in Babylon. Jehoiachin, the son of Jehoiakim, he's put in charge. These names are something, aren't they?
Yes.
It's easy to get them all mixed up. But skip down to verse 10. So Jehoiakim actually died right before Nebuchadnezzar came. And it's his son that's in charge. And he only reigns for 3 months till when Nebuchadnezzar captures Jerusalem and deports Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar puts his own guy in charge now. Puts a guy in charge, and that's actually the uncle of the king. And so he names him Zedekiah. And so Zedekiah now reigns for a while. And then Zedekiah revolts. That's what the whole book of Jeremiah is practically about. Is Jeremiah the prophet is saying, don't fight Babylon. Don't fight Babylon. Don't fight Babylon. No, people go, we can do it. Let's fight Babylon. And they end up getting wiped out. And so after that final revolt, Zedekiah's revolt, then there's no more kings after that. Now Nebuchadnezzar puts a governor in charge. So there's a total of 3 deportations, and the third one is the most. That's in 586 BC. That's the most severe one of all. They completely obliterate Jerusalem. They destroy all the buildings. It says there's a few poor people left, but everybody else has been deported. There's nothing. So Jerusalem and Judah are kind of wiped out at that point. So that's kind of the larger context. A lot of what's happening in the Bible is happening around this geopolitical situation where Babylon has now taken charge. And everything that happens in the book of Daniel is happening while he's here as a captive in Babylon.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First of all, how far is that from Israel?
Oh, it's far. So this is Israel right here.
Yeah.
It's a little bit. And,
What do you figure, about 500 miles?
oh, that's a good question. There is 200. Yeah, it looks like about 600 miles maybe.
Wow.
And what you notice is, where are the empires? They're here. But what about this?
Is that desert?
That's desert. No, nobody go. Why did they fight the battle up here? Because they're not going to cross here. They go this way, right? And this one comes that way.
And then the other question is, what was happening in Israel, was that a contemporary of I can't remember who you said, Jeremiah?
Yes.
This was all happening at the same time?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So Daniel is deported in the first deportation, so 605. Ezekiel is taken in the second deportation, which would be 597. And then in the final destruction in 586, Jeremiah escapes and goes to Egypt, and he dies there.
Okay.
So those are all those things are all kind of happening at the same time. Okay, let's go back to Daniel chapter 3. So Daniel and his friends are living in Babylon, and something happened. We don't know this. I can't say this for sure, but I find it very interesting. In 595, there was a rebellion against King Nebuchadnezzar, and he had to regain control over his own empire. And so it almost kind of makes sense that after he regains control and he's had to purge the army and get rid of all the people in his army that had plotted against him, now he builds this great big idol, a great big image. And he says, okay, we're going to have a big convocation. Everybody get together. And we're going to have all this music. And when the music plays, everybody worship. And what is that a sign of? We're all with you, Nebuchadnezzar. Right? We're all on your side. We're all doing things your way. It's his way of kind of cementing his power, which helps you understand a little bit maybe why he gets so furious when these three men won't bow. It's like, oh, I put them in charge of things in Babylon, and here they're against me. They won't even bow to my image. They're part of the bad ones that I should have purged. No wonder he gets so furious about this, right? But I think part of what this story is designed to do is to show us the tremendous pressure that was upon these three men and how God protected them. So I want you to look at some things here in chapter 3 in terms of how the story is told to show us just how hard it is, how much pressure is on them. So the first one, look at verse 2. Look at verse 2. And it ends with all these people who have come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So it's worded in such a way as to say, King Nebuchadnezzar is the one that put this here. And then look at verse 3. And there's all the people gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Well, there it is again. And look at the next sentence in verse 3. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Oh, wait, are you starting to notice something here? Let's go to verse 5. The end of verse 5, the last sentence. The image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Go to verse 7, the end of verse 7. The golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Go to verse 12, the end of verse 12. The golden image that you have set up. Go to the end of verse 14. The golden image that I have set up. So by repeating this over and over again, what is that communicating? What's it telling you? Who's in charge here? Nebuchadnezzar, right? Who's the one calling the shots? It's Nebuchadnezzar. It's designed to help you see I think some of the pressure that is on these men, that they're what they're going up against. We watched and I watched last week. It was on. I haven't seen it for it's probably been over 10 years. The Chariots of Fire. Does anyone remember that movie?
Yeah.
It's a good movie. So here's this Scottish Christian runner in the Olympics, and he discovers that his event is on Sunday, and he won't run on Sunday because it goes against his faith. And remember what they did? They set up a meeting with him and the big shots from the British Olympics Committee. And then, remember, they brought in the Prince of Wales. So oh, by the way, here's the prince trying to talk you into compromising and lowering your standard. He wasn't intimidated, was he? But you can see how that's designed. It's just say, here's these big shots. So, well, that's what this is designed to do. Who's in charge here? Nebuchadnezzar. You three boys are going to go against Nebuchadnezzar. Now let's look at this in verse 2. Who's with Nebuchadnezzar? The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the kingdom. And then go to verse 3. Then, there's the satraps, the prefects, the governors. Why doesn't he just write, and all those guys?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be easier?
Yeah.
So what's the point of repeating it? Has the same effect, right? It's to say, oh, by the way, these are all the people lined up against you three boys. These governors and these prefects and these big shots. The way the story is told is to help you see how much pressure is being put on these guys. Let's go to verse 4. The herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages." So who all is on Nebuchadnezzar's side? Everybody. Go to verse 7. As soon as you hear the sound, halfway down, all peoples, nations, and languages. Fellow, why doesn't he just say and everybody there? It's right. It's to emphasize that everybody is on board with this, except for you three. What's wrong with you? Let's look at the repetition of the instruments. I get a kick out of this. Go to verse 5. So you got the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music. Now go to verse 10. You have the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music. And go to verse 15. Same thing. So why? I mean, they're writing this stuff by hand, remember. It takes a long time. Why don't they make it easy on themselves?
See above.
Yeah, it's this repetition, all the music, the whole shebang is all set up. This is a big show. This is not a minor league project. The whole thing is set up against you. And let's look at the threats of punishment here in verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Verse 11. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And verse 15. Halfway through the verse. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. So there's that repetition again. And it's all designed to emphasize how serious the punishment is going to be if you don't listen. So can you get a feel for the sense of pressure that's on these poor boys? How overwhelming this must seem if they're going to stand up against it. And something else too that is very interesting is the names. So in this particular chapter, They're first mentioned in verse 12. Do you see that? Certain Jews whom you appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then in verse 13, they're all named again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then in verse 14, they're all mentioned again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You'll never get this wrong on a trivia question again. In verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar's expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And verse 20, he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, what's the point of repeating their names over and over again like that? Remember that those are not their real names. Does anyone remember that?
Why did it change their name?
Yes, why indeed?
Because
Yes.
these were Babylonian names?
Yes. So we won't look it up, but you could on your own go back and look up chapter 1, and you see that when they were taken out of Israel and brought to Babylon, they had Hebrew names. So one was named Hananiah. Anytime you see a name in the Bible with that yeah, at the end, that's a shortening of the name of God, right? God's name is Yahweh. So anytime you've got somebody with an in their name, it's usually means their name means something that has God in it. So you got Abraham, Zechariah, Hosea. They're just all over the place. So this first fellow's name was Hananiah, and that means God is gracious. And his name gets changed into Shadrach, which we're not entirely sure, but scholars think that name means that Marduk is in command. Marduk was the head of their pantheon of the Babylonian false gods. So you see what happened by changing his name? His name gets changed from a name that has his God, the true God in it, to a name with a false god, a Babylonian name. And the second fellow's name was Mishael. So you see that in the Bible a lot too, names that have El in it, because El is short for Elohim. It's another of the names for God in the Old Testament. So Mishael means who is what God is. And his name gets changed into Meshach, which could possibly mean who is what Aku is. Aku is the moon god. So you see how they intentionally gave him a name that kind of mimics and mocks his Hebrew name by sticking a Babylonian god in there instead of the true God. And the third of the boys was named Azariah. So you hear that in there again? So it means Azariah means God has helped. And his name gets changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nebo. Nebo was the god of agriculture for the Babylonians. So you see how they changed all their names? And so the story keeps repeating all of their Babylonian names, almost to try to emphasize that even in their names now, they should be Babylonian. They should act as Babylonians. So what I want you to see in all of that, just the way the story's told, and the way you could tell this to your Sunday school class in 5 minutes and shorten it way up. Tell the three guys in the fiery furnace. Why does it keep repeating all these things? It has the effect of emphasizing how much pressure is on these guys to go along with the crowd and do what everyone else is saying. We have the same thing now today in our day, don't we? So you can see it in our culture. If you don't go along with the things that our culture is telling you to do, for example, accept transgender rights, guess what? There's tons of pressure on you. everyone's against you. Every company that you work for, and I shouldn't say every, but it's interesting because I had to vote for the officers for some companies that we have some stock in. So I wanted to look them up, so I'm looking up these companies. Every single one of them, they all have diversity, equity, and inclusion in their policies now.
It's right in the mission statement.
In their statements. They're all committed to this. And we know as Christians that it's terrible, it's false. I won't go into all why, but you can see the pressure there is. So the corporations support it. The government supports it. The teachers support it. There's all of these churches that support it. You hear it constantly in the news. And if you don't go along with it, there's something wrong with you. You're a bigoted. And they use the names. So just like they changed the names of these Hebrew boys into Babylonian names, they use terminology to say things so that the terms themselves put more pressure. So it's not trans rights, it's gender affirming care. How could you be against gender affirming care? How could you be against that, right? It just sounds like such a good thing. Same with abortion, right? It's not that you are opposed to abortion, you're opposed to women's reproductive rights. Who would be against women's reproductive rights? Or women's health care. Don't we all want women to have good health care? Of course we do. So the way they phrase it, the terminology, it's all designed to put pressure on people to go along with certain trends and ideas in society. In this case, though, it's much worse than any of that, because in this case, the pressure is being put on them to commit overt idolatry, to get down and worship a foreign image. Which verse or which commandment of the 10 Commandments does that violate? The first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods. And then he goes on to explain, you shall not make to yourself any graven images for the purpose of worshiping them. So I want you to see how much pressure is being put on these poor guys. And so finally, when it comes out that they did not get down and worship, and Nebuchadnezzar finds them, and look at the end of verse 15. It's in Nebuchadnezzar's own mouth that the irony of this whole story comes out. He's threatening them. He's going to throw them in the burning furnace. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? When he says that, the expectation in Nebuchadnezzar's mind is, there's none. And what's going to be the point of the story? Oh yes, there is one. And look at the answer that the three boys give. This is amazing. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve our gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.
Your gods.
Worship your gods. Serve your gods. Or worship the golden image that you have set up. Did I say it wrong?
You said our God.
Yeah, it's your. So they have one, in spite of all this pressure and in this terrible threat against them, they believe that their God can protect them. He's able to protect them. And he says, he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Now, does that mean that they knew for sure that they were going to come out of that fiery furnace? No.
No, they didn't care.
They did, right. Even if they died, they were willing to do it. They knew that God would protect them from the king's power, but even if that might mean dying, but they weren't afraid of that. And so they say, it's just so powerful, verse 18, but if not, in other words, even if he doesn't, we're going to still worship and follow our true God, even if he doesn't. what a powerful example that is of faith and courage in the face of pressure, which we're all gonna experience, I think, more and more of that in our culture. As society drifts into more spiritual darkness, we're all gonna face pressures too. And it's gonna look like everybody's against us. Your family's gonna call you up on the phone and go, what have you got? Like white privilege or something? Are you a white supremacist? What's wrong with you that you don't go along? Everything will be thrown at you if you don't go along with it. But we want to stand on the truth of God and His Word, no matter what. So they fire up the furnace 7 times. That may be symbolic. The number 7 we're going to learn in the book of Daniel. Well, we won't do it, but if we were studying the whole book of Daniel, you'd discover the number 7 is a very significant symbol. What does 7 stand for in the Bible typically? Complete, right. Because God created in 6 days, and on the 7th day He rested. So 7 becomes a symbol for the kind of the maximum, the complete, the perfect, the fulfillment. It's all done. So like when Peter says to Jesus, how many times should I forgive my neighbor when they sin against me? And yeah, so there's symbolism in that, right? It's the 7 is a perfect number and multiplied by 70, so it's like the perfect number times everything, meaning no limit to it. So I don't know that if you had a temperature gauge there that the fiery furnace is now 7 times, went from 400 degrees to
28.
Thank you. That's fast. But what he says is that it's perfectly hot now. It's reached the max temperature. And in fact, just to kind of heighten the sense of drama, what happens to the guys that carry him to the edge and throw him in the fire? Yeah, they go, don't put your head over the... But then, how amazing, King Nebuchadnezzar is looking in, and he asks his counselors in verse 24, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? And they said, true, O king. And he answered, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. So he sees this 4th person in there with them. Now, who is that person? I don't know if we know for sure.
It doesn't say angel?
He says in verse 28.
He says an
he
angel.
refers to an
Yes.
Oh.
So it could very well have been an angel that God sent. There's a lot of people, including a lot of the church fathers, that believe that this maybe was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. So I don't know if we can say for sure, but it could very well be. But there's something about just seeing him. All Nebuchadnezzar has to do is see him, and he knows that this guy is not like a regular man. There's something different about him. So he orders them to come out, and they come out. Everybody gathers around. Not a hair is singed. Their clothing is not burned. The bonds are burned. They're not tied up anymore, but their clothing's not burned. In fact, they don't even smell like smoke. And Nebuchadnezzar, look at verse 28. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Now, remember the question he asked before, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Now he's answered his own question, right? Who is the God? It's the God of these 3, the God of the true God of heaven. Is he a true follower and believer in Yahweh at this point? I don't think so. He still seems to be a polytheist. He still seems to think, yeah, we've all got our gods, but you have shown me that your God is the most powerful. So he he hasn't given up his beliefs in other gods at this point, I don't think. But he is awed by this great miracle, and he recognizes that it's because these three men were not afraid to be thrown into that fire, to yield up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. So you see how, with all the great pressure that was on them, how great is the deliverance that God makes of them. Let's flip over just for a second to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11, does anybody know what the name is for this chapter in the Bible?
Faith chapter.
It's the faith chapter, right. It tells the stories of the great people in the scriptures who were great in faith. And let's just go to verse 33. Let's start at verse 32. It just makes more sense, I guess. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Who did that? It's Daniel, right? Quenched the power of fire. Who did that?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right. So they become heroes of the faith, that their firm and strong faith in the Lord is vindicated by God's great deliverance that he gives them. So back in Daniel 3, then at the very end, Nebuchadnezzar makes a decree. Any people, nation, or language. Oh, now we've heard that before, right? So it's his way of saying, just like everybody was against you, now everybody is prohibited from saying anything against your God. They will be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there's no other God who's able to rescue in this way. And then they get promoted. All right, isn't that a good story? Any closing comments or?
Question, you referred to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as boys. Do we know how old they were? I didn't see it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I think sometimes they're portrayed as young. Daniel, their contemporary, is there in Babylon and Persia for 70 years. So if these were young men, if they're like 13, 14, 15 years old when they go to Babylon together, that would explain how they can be there 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were like in their 20s or 30s when they go, it's hard to imagine they would have lived that long. So I'm inclined to think that they were younger. Let me just look up something real fast. Daniel chapter 1, I wonder if it mentions it in the story of the...
As for these four
Let's
youths.
say chapter 7, verse 17.
He says youths.
As for these four youths.
Oh yeah, there we go, good. Chapter 1, verse 17. As for these four youths. So, I
Maybe
think they were young.
teenagers?
What?
Teenagers, maybe? You would call it teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers. And if this is happening at the time right after the rebellion, they are now at this point 10 years older. So they might be maybe in their mid-20s at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been living in Babylon for 10 years. All right.
There's one more quick question. Daniel's Babylonian name, Belteshazzar. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, what was that? Oh, that was something with a god too.
Did they ever change them back to their regular name?
No.
No, they just kept those.
But you do notice that the rest of the book, Daniel is always called Daniel.
Yeah.
It's not called Belteshazzar. But these guys are called by their Babylonian names. I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
It's to try to just reinforce,
Yeah.
you know, what you call someone has a big influence in how they will act and what they will do. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for being here and for your patience. I hope I didn't put anyone to sleep.
It certainly made me see the difference.
According to Google,
Yeah.
Daniel means God is my judge.
Yes, that's right.
And Belteshazzar means lady protect the king. I don't know if that's,
Belshazzar means what?
that doesn't.
Yeah, it says lady protect the king.
Lady
Yeah.
The
protect
purpose of the manual is-
It's really hard to be a teacher with all these phones because I feel so stupid.
Well, I just don't see a connection to lady.
Yeah.
It might be reference to like one of the goddesses or something. Yeah.
Like verse 3 said that Daniel means judge. That was right in the scripture.
Yeah.
But there was no explanation for Belshazzar.
Belshazzar.
That's very strange.
Belshazzar.
All right, thank you, everybody.
I'm wondering what they did.